What's going on, everyone? I'm just your average, everyday, atypical Canadian nerd here to react to and comment upon your average, everyday American man here to react to and learn from a video about why not to live on the border between Canada and the United States of America. Well, where I live in the Niagara region, the main reason why not to live on the border is because then you'd be living underwater. Well, you don't want to do that. You don't want to live underwater. In other places, it's because the border itself is a giant space between two forests. Which, again, you don't want to really live in the middle of a forest, let alone in the clearing in between two forests. But there, like this picture implies, are other reasons you might not want to live there. And so, with that said, I'd just like to let you know, pay attention later in the video. We're going to have the French word of a day. If you like what I'm doing here, please like the video on your way in. If you like my voice but you don't like what I'm doing, please leave a comment. And, well, with that said, let's get this picture out of the way and get this video underway.
What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about why you do not want to live on the US-Canadian border. This one kind of surprised me at first, and then the more and more I looked at it, I kind of began to understand.
Oh, hey, let's think back to that picture, right? Where there was a house that was literally half in Canada, half in the United States. Well, think of the property taxes, the income taxes. Oh, yeah, you wouldn't want that.
I think. I would think, at first glance, if you're living on the border or near the border, it's kind of the best of both worlds. You can jump into the US, take advantage of things you need to do there, maybe go up to Canada, do whatever you want. Yeah, I'm starting to think it probably does not work like that.
Well, mostly it does. Border agents between our two countries are pretty laxed when they see our passports. Like, oh, Canadian, welcome. Oh, hey, what are you here for? You're just here to buy some groceries at a lower price? Cool. Come on over, enjoy. It's not a big deal. And when we get Americans coming up, it's more like, hey, welcome. Hope you enjoy your stay. And yes, the lower cost of medication is a good reason to come here.
And it may, in fact, be a logistical nightmare to live. I mean, can you live literally on the US-Canadian border? What would that make you? That would make you something entirely new.
Well, not really. Dual citizenship has existed for a very long time, and it doesn't mean that you have to live on the border to get dual citizenship. Most people that I know have, like, parents from one or the other, or they were born in one place and immigrated to the other, or something close to that.
Not American nor Canadian, but something in between, something more powerful. Maybe we wouldn't be able to stop you. Maybe that's the problem here. Why you shouldn't do no. Okay. But
yeah, that's good. Like the hyper North American, I'm not gonna the uber North American. Oh, yeah, that wasn't good, was it? Let's just stay quiet for now.
I am thinking there's probably just a bunch of little annoying things that might happen if you live literally on the border or near the border. I don't know, and that's okay, because I'm ready to find out. I'm here to learn about it. So let's take a look.
Well, off the top of my head, yeah, there definitely are some inconveniences. Like, oh, when the pandemic was happening, we closed the border. Now, people who live in border towns, they would often have a house on one side of the border, have a job on the other side of the border, and that was a major inconvenience for them. Then there's the cities that are on the border, like there's a place where there's a park, and the park is half US, half Canada. And you can enter the park in one country, leave the park in the other country, and you don't have to go through any sort of customs to exit. And that means that there are some families that are split along that border on either side of the park. And when borders close, people get cut off. Oh, and then there's a part of Canada that dips into the United States. And in order to get from Canada to Canada, you have to go through the United States. That was a big inconvenience, and more that I hope we'll get into in this video.
Why you don't want to live on the US-Canadian border?
This is Point Roberts, a small city located on the Tsawwassen Peninsula. While it's only accessible by driving south from Canada, its location just below the 49th parallel actually makes it part of the United States.
Yeah, sometimes I get my facts mixed up, and I think this city is the representation of me getting mixed up, It's an American city that to get to the rest of America, you have to go through Canada. Now, just flip what I said earlier, and it's fine.
And for centuries, it was...
Oh... So, is there a lot of stuff like this? You can only get to Point Roberts because it's what do you call that? A peninsula?
Yes.
Or the body of land that has 3 sides on water. Don't don't point out that I don't know what it's called.
Well, you actually got it right. It's called a peninsula. Think Florida. And think that it's shaped like a Ugh.
You can only get to that from going north to south. But it's below the border. Okay.
Below the 49th parallel actually makes it part of the United States. And for centuries, it was relatively accessible for Canadian and American tourists alike, as visitors and residents could pass through Canada to access the city uninhibited. The locals became dependent on its easy accessibility and lack of border restrictions to entice tourists to come indulge in its not quite Canadian charm. Now, that was all well and good until it got bad, and bad. After 9/11, and again during the pandemic, the US closed its border with Canada, completely straining the residents of Point Roberts.
Yes. This is the problem. It's technically in the United States, but in order to get out, the literal only way is through Canada. And when the border closes... Okay.
Today, it's struggling to survive, with one news outlet referring to it as a, quote, ghost town in the making. Point Roberts' story, though, isn't unique. A myriad of towns along the US-Canada border have relied upon the absence of a secured border for centuries.
Oh, I was like, how... This is unfortunate, for sure, but is this like a big issue? I was like, this just seems like an isolated incident. No, apparently... This is happening a few times in these strategic little points along the border. That is unfortunate.
Stateless cities from Maine to Washington pride themselves on their diverse communities, but increasingly, their nebulous borders have presented new challenges for residents who are now separated from each other by the presence of a very real boundary. As early as the US's founding, its shared border with Canada has been subject to good old-fashioned fighting. As George Washington's signature dried on the Treaty of Paris, land surveyors got to work mapping the US-Canada, then called British North America, border established at the 45th parallel. In the following century, both countries realized that just...
That's kind of funny to me.
That's why I was laughing, because it's just like, let's draw a line on the map, and that's the border. Why not?
It's just the 45th parallel, like a literal straight line. You'd think it'd be more defined like other borders around the world. Every border you can ever think of is this jagged random line.
Which is due to terrain, like mountains and rivers.
Where a couple of people were just like, hey, that's mine. And the other person was like, okay, this part's mine. And then that happened a million times. I'm sure it happened exactly like that, too.
Yes, with guns and explosives and swords and whatnot.
And random borders were made, but this is just defined by a parallel. I don't know. It's efficient, for sure.
Drawing a line across a piece of paper wasn't the most reliable way of splitting a continent into two. So, disputes over land claims in Maine and New York slowed the process of figuring out the surveyor's chicken scratch for decades. The US even started building a military base in Canadian territory during the 1840s, which was subsequently named Fort Blunder and abandoned because the US would never build a military base in a foreign country. That would be crazy. But finally...
Oh, that was sarcasm. I caught it this time. Good for me.
The Oregon Treaty of 1846 brought the two countries together in agreement. They moved the US-Canada border to the 49th parallel, which allowed the United States to retain full ownership of Oregon, Washington, and all the hipsters contained within.
Okay. No, couldn't you have taken the hipsters, man? Canada, you could have taken them. No.
Don't worry, we have our fair share here. They're just a different kind of hipster than yours in the States, mainly because, um, yeah, I can't think of how they're different.
No, we love them. So we kind of kept the 49th parallel as a border, roughly, and then in certain parts, east and west, we kind of went with some squiggles. Okay.
Ever since, Americans and Canadians have lived along this line in border communities. Point Roberts was originally settled by Canadian trappers in 1858 and has long been a
I'm sorry, I can't. I have to stop it again. Border communities? Are there communities of people that do in fact live so much on the border that half of the town is in Canada and half of it is in the United States?
Yes. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about the people who live in one country and work in the other, or have family just across the border, or date right across the border. Yeah, totally.
Is that a thing? And do they have like a yearly kickball tournament or like a what would be more hockey? No, hockey versus baseball. Yes, that'd be a good hybrid.
Uh, do we have a baseball hockey hybrid? I don't think so. Like, we play kickball, which is a hybrid of soccer or football and baseball. Basically, it's baseball, only instead of a ball and a bat, it's a ball and a foot.
Is that what we mean by border communities?
and all the hipsters. Point Roberts was originally settled, which allowed the United States to retain full ownership of Oregon, Washington, and all the hipsters contained within. Ever since, Americans and Canadians have lived along this line in border communities. Point Roberts was originally settled by Canadian trappers in 1858 and has long been a vacation community for nerds who only vacation in places created by weird surveying oddities. Though at one point residents wanted to secede from the United States and join Canada because they were sick of all their awesome freedom, it remains part of the US, even though the
Oh, I was wondering, like, what's happening in the modern day to this? Are we actually cutting it off at the tip and calling it the United States? That seems silly, to be
Yes, Canada can be a very silly place.
honest.
town leases water from Vancouver and receives assistance from the Delta, British Columbia Fire Department. There's a number of border towns that share culture and community along the world's longest undefended border for a variety of reasons, including Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario.
Just a quick edit there. It's pronounced Sioux, not Salt or Sol or anything else you might think it's Sioux. So Sault Ste. Marie.
Sweetgrass, Montana, and Coutts, Alberta, Summit, Washington, and Abbotsford, British Columbia.
Oh, so there are cities and towns on the border. It's just for some reason we either call it the same thing, like Sault Ste. Marie?
Sault Ste. Marie.
What did he call this?
Along the world's longest undefended border for a variety of reasons, including Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and
Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan? Okay.
Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario.
And Ontario. Yeah, they just consider it two separate cities. It's kind of sad. Can't we just be one and just have like a giant proverbial line going through it or something? Or no line at all.
That's practically what it is.
Let's just unify. Let's stop beating around the bush. Let's just be one nation.
Sweetgrass, Montana, and Coutts, Alberta, Summit, Washington, and Abbotsford, British Columbia, Derby Line, Vermont, and Stansted, Quebec, and Blaine, Washington, and Surrey, British Columbia. Some, like Niagara Falls, started as vacation towns for curious tourists and barrel enthusiasts in the 1800s, while others in British Columbia and Alberta attracted miners and entrepreneurs during the gold rush.
So he quickly glossed over barrel enthusiasts. So Niagara Falls is a series of waterfalls. There are two main waterfalls. There is the Horseshoe Falls, which is the Canadian one. It's the big tourist attraction. And then there's the American side of the falls, which has its own name I'm not thinking of right now, and that's okay. It doesn't really matter for the context of this video. And he mentioned barrel enthusiasts. So it being a giant waterfall, people got the idea that they could go over the waterfall, but of course if you take a boat over the waterfall, then when it gets down to the bottom, it smashes into pieces and people disappear. Uh, so they thought, how can we survive the fall down the waterfall? And so this whole thing with barrels started to happen where people would get inside of a barrel. Think like a fish or pickles, right? And they would just get in the barrel and go over. And then over time, they started to innovate and make higher technology barrels to more safely go over the waterfall. And there's like a museum about that on the Canadian side of the border.
These communities hold a certain pride in their stateless identities, not defined by nationality or citizenship, without a true border. Derby Line and Stansted even share the Haskell Free Library and Opera House, originally built by an American-Canadian couple in 1904, who met while living in the two towns and somehow overcame the massive cultural divide keeping Americans and Canadians apart.
I think that was also sarcastic humor, because there's not a huge cultural divide. It's a lot of little things, that's all.
And though the US and Canada later charged the international
Wow, what a love story. So there really are communities living on the border and having love stories where Americans marry Canadians and share a library. I mean, that's pretty cool, to be honest.
Yes, so where my sister used to live, which is much closer to Buffalo, but still in Canada, right? She would take her kids over the border for programs, like community programs, and other people would come to Canada for community programs. She would go there to buy certain types of groceries that are only available in the United States, such as cherry Coca-Cola, for example. Yeah, it used to be available here in Canada, discontinued, recontinued, discontinued. It's a whole thing. And I had a friend who lived here in the Canadian side, started dating someone on the American side. They're married now, but they still have their respective homes. So, like, every weekend, one of them goes to the other country. It doesn't seem very convenient to me, but hey, to each their own.
Boundary Commission with clearing the border of any vegetation in a 6-meter, 20-foot radius in order to prevent any more Americans and Canadians from ever falling in love. Residents of border towns could still move freely between sister cities without passports or security checks.
Right.
The passage of the North American Free Trade Agreement in 1994 further promoted the idea of a border-free North America. But 9/11 and later COVID-19 changed everything.
Yes, very much so. Security went up and has only gone up ever since.
At 10:05
Yeah, I was gonna say, so it used to be just like very loose, very like, okay, you can travel between the two countries, cross the border to get to your sister town or whatever, just easily. No one really cared. You didn't even need a passport back in the good old day.
Very true.
And now, everything had to get ruined.
a.m. on 9/11, the White House sealed the northern border with a level 1 customs alert, something that had never been done before. All traffic came to a grinding halt, with lines of trucks and cars spanning 30 miles or 50 kilometers deep.
Wow, I have not seen a lineup that long, but I'm not surprised that it happened, because I have seen the border lineups, and yeah, they can take some time.
Some places. This shutdown reconfigured the US and Canada's border security measures and cut off Point Roberts from Canada entirely. While Canada tried to maintain an open and secure border with the US after the terrorist attacks, given that $1.9 billion in ketchup-flavored potato chips crossed it each day, the northern boundary became a hard line that no one could cross without identification.
Wow. I actually didn't know that the border between the US and Canada closed during 9/11. Didn't know that.
Okay, so it didn't close during 9/11, but some of the people who hijacked planes apparently got into the United States using a Canadian passport, and so security was tightened. And now, whenever someone needs to go from Canada to the US, they have to show their papers. COVID made it a closure because we didn't want to transmit the spread, but it happened anyway.
But I'm guessing once that happened and the precedent was set that that was a possibility, that probably shocked a lot of people, and things were probably never the same once everyone was like, oh, this is a thing that can actually happen, and it screws up a lot of these communities when it does.
which made it challenging for border communities to be the singular, cohesive entities they'd always been. With the US's new border security, border town residents became required to show identification to pass over the US-Canadian border, even when they were simply walking to the other side of town. While residents of Point Roberts had previously been allowed to pass through Canada without a passport or birth certificate, they were now stopped at each security checkpoint along the border, first while leaving the mainland, and then again while re-entering the southern half of the Tsawwassen Peninsula.
Oh, that is so sad. That's so annoying. No wonder it's becoming a ghost town. Like, no one's gonna do that.
So whenever they want to leave Point Roberts to buy those messed up Oreo flavors that are probably legal in Canada, they're subject to car searches and border agents. And for towns all along the US-Canadian border, it's a hard pill to swallow. They're not these singular communities they used to be, and with the COVID-19 pandemic shutting down the border for much of 2020, these towns were divided once again.
Wow, this is actually sad. Like, this is serious. I've never had to experience this because I don't live on the US-Canadian border. But this is affecting thousands and thousands of people, thousands of families, I bet, that in a really tangible, real way are affected when the border is like under such harsh scrutiny like this.
Absolutely, yes. Major inconvenience for the people who regularly cross the border. And now, what with immigration policies being modified, let's say, there are other borders that were very open that are now completely closed.
That's really unfortunate.
Point Roberts lost 80% of its business and could no longer welcome the hundreds of part-time residents that had previously padded its economy. While officials did allow a ferry from Bellingham, Washington to periodically visit with tourists, it wasn't enough to stave off the isolation or...
Okay. The ferry went from Bellingham to Point Roberts. But looking at the map, there are much closer places that a ferry ought to be able to travel. And ferries don't make sense to me. Sometimes, like, to get to Vancouver Island, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Other times, like, okay, Toronto and Niagara are separated by Lake Ontario. And when I'm standing on the shore looking towards Toronto, I can see Toronto. But if I want to get there, I have to drive around the lake. We could really use a ferry, but I don't have the money to buy boats to make it happen. Maybe someday.
or separation residents experienced. And though its border has now reopened,
That is so silly. Just make it part of Canada. This feels silly. That it's really hurting that part of the United States, I should say. Just make it part of Canada. Let the people not have to go through border patrol.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense.
stave off the isolation or separation residents experienced. And though its border has now reopened, the additional burden of COVID tests, entry forms, and vaccination requirements before entering Canada has made it even harder for border town residents to reassemble the shattered pieces of the boundless communities they once had.
Yeah.
Arbitrary borders are a big inconvenience in North America, but elsewhere in the world, they're the fuel that fires some of history's most persistent conflicts. Joseph from Real Life Lore covers many of these.
Yeah, it's kind of cool that the United States and Canada have the world's biggest unprotected
Undefended.
border, I think is the way the narrator phrased it. We're just so, like, rock solid, like, sure that we're going to be cool. That the nations are just going to get along and be cool with each other. That we have, like, absolute trust. That it's just undefended, it's there, but apparently, as of the modern day, super annoying to pass between.
Cases in
Well, far more inconvenient rather than super annoying. Like, do you like lines? No, nobody likes to queue up for anything. But does it ruin your day? No.
in his Nebula exclusive series, Modern Conflicts. It's really a show that exhibits exactly why Nebula exists. How controversial,
Wait a minute, this is an ad.
Yes.
An advertisement. I thought this was part of the video. He almost tricked me.
up directly,
Oh, she's holding a credit card. Probably not.
And
Probably doesn't have too much to do with the
I'm guessing this is the end of the video. Yeah.
Canadian-U.S. border. I think that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the end of the video. It was just an ad for Nebula. I still gotta say that was by half as interesting, and I liked that a lot. That was a really great video.
That was a bit of a short video in my feeling. Yeah, only 15 minutes long. Okay. So I guess that brings us to the French word of the day, which would be short. So let's translate short. It can also mean small. And so let's combine the two words, and the French word for short or small is petit. The letter at the end is silent. We love silent letters in French. But the one in the middle and the one at the start, we totally pronounce. So that is petit. Small is petit. Short, petit. And this video is petit.
Although, kind of sad there when you think about it. It essentially ended up teaching me that there's a bunch of beautiful border communities all along the US-Canadian border that are really getting the short end of the stick, as we say. Really getting a lot of bad stuff happening. With 9/11 and COVID and all sorts of regulations being enacted on the border. I'd like to know how real of an effect. It's like I was getting at earlier. Are some of these towns, some of them are sister towns, like one next to each other, that one is Canadian, one is American. I didn't think it would be set up like that, but I get it. I understand why you would do it that way. Are some just one that has been cut in half, and they're
Yeah, Sault Ste. Marie is a very good example of that.
really struggling, or either way?
And yes, there are some places where you will buy your groceries or go to church or go to school in a different country than where you live, and having to show your papers every time you need to get groceries or go to church or go to school or pick up your kids from school and then bring them back home again. Very much inconvenient. And we understand why it needs to happen, but at the same time, we don't like it.
Sounds like it's super annoying and causing a lot of problems for these communities. So I sympathize on that. Seriously, I do. But without a doubt, this is a little more unexpected than what I thought when I first read this video title. I was thinking, oh, maybe it's just saying it's a logistical nightmare. But not only is it a logistical nightmare, it's really affecting people's livings and lives. So that's kind of sad.
Now, I live close enough to the border that I could go back and forth if I wanted to. I could buy my groceries in the United States. Sure. Is the gas that I pay to get there worth the savings? Probably not. And does living near the border bother me in any way? No.
Anyway, if you found this video interesting as well, feel free to give it a like or leave a comment.
Yeah.
And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada,
me
Canadian
reacting
culture,
to him,
places,
reacting to
things,
us,
stuff there that
context,
I've never seen ever before.
things I've seen.
Feel free to subscribe
Yeah.
for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time. What's going on?
Yes, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something, and I hope you got a kick out of whatever was going on around here, because I don't know, sometimes... And thank you. I enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed it just a little bit as much as I did. And I hope you all just keep being awesome. Bye.
Science, spirit, life. Nerd Pumpkin.